Here, here is a question about Farage once again. I mean, he doesn't seem to keep far away from this channel. What's his link to the Epstein files? Why does it matter? Why could it hurt him even if the connection is indirect? Farage has two problems this week, and they are not neatly separable. The first is domestic and personal, a growing pile of testimonies from Dulwich College contemporaries alleging racist and anti-Semitic behaviour during his school time, with Starmer and ministers publicly demanding a serious explanation. The second is transatlantic and political, the sudden reactivation of the Jeffrey Epstein scandal in the United States, including a fresh documentary cache and Congress voting to release further files, which has dragged Farage into the story by proximity to Trump and by particularly proximity to Steve Bannon. Put those together and you get a single larger question hanging over Farage. What sort of man has he been? What sort of networks has he moved in? And what does he do when old shadows fall across his present ambition? Starting with the Epstein files themselves, the US House voted almost unanimously to release more Epstein material, and Trump has now signed legislation committing to publication of unclassified files, with the political class in Washington in full melodrama about who knew what, who is named, and who is still being protected. Whatever emerges, this is no longer a marginal story. It is a live-fire test of elite accountability, and the right in America is eating itself over it. Farage stepped into that blaze by calling for the files to be released. Aha! On the surface, that looks like a canny bit of distance management. He positions himself as the transparency man, gently chides Trump for being at odds with his own base, and hopes to look principled rather than complicit. There is a certain logic there. If your friend's house is on fire, you do not pretend you cannot smell the smoke. But the manoeuvre does not solve his underlying difficulty, because his public fate is tied to Trump's public smell. Farage has spent a decade cultivating the role of Trump's British Tribune, the man who gets a seat at Mar-a-Lago, who is treated as a fellow insurgent against liberal elites, who can sell a Brexit-shaped version of MAGA to an UK audience. That brand only works when Trump looks like a swaggering winner. It looks grubby when Trump looks like a beneficiary of cover-up. Now bring in the Bannon strand. The Byline Times investigation, buttressed by FOIA research, argues that the European populist apparatus Bannon tried to build after leaving the White House was not a purely American export. It rested on a Brussels foundation called the Movement, that was created in 2017 by figures in Farage's orbit, notably his longtime aide and now partner Laurie Ferrari, along with Mishkel Modrikaman and others. Farage then introduced Bannon into that structure, effectively handing him a ready-made shell for a pan-European network. The newly released Epstein messages show Epstein acting as Bannon's fixer and advisor during that same period, offering travel help, strategic counsel on how to use opaque non-profit funding, and warnings about foreign agent registration risks. In plain terms, Epstein was not just lurking nearby, he was in Bannon's ear about how to move money and influence without leaving fingerprints. What does this mean for Farage? Carefully, it doesn't mean Farage is accused of any criminal or sexual wrongdoing. There's no file saying Farage was on a plane or at a party with Epstein, and nobody reputable is claiming that. The story is one of political ecology, not direct guilt. Yet political ecology is not trivial. If you're trying to be Prime Minister, you do not get to say that the sort of people who build your networks are irrelevant just because you never shook hands with their worst patron. The claim is that Farage helped midwife a project that Epstein was simultaneously sustaining through Bannon. Even if Epstein never wrote Farage a check, the architecture Farage's circle built was for a time fertilized by Epstein's advice and logistics, and that is where the damage lies, in moral smell and narrative coherence. You can see the opposition's line forming already. Farage is not merely a noisy bloke who likes arguing on telly. He is embalmed in a long-running transatlantic insurgent network funded and advised by men who specialize in secrecy, manipulation, and moral rot. You can defend yourself against one accusation at a time. It is harder to defend yourself against a portrait of your whole world as a swamp. Now, pivot back to the school allegations. The Guardian reports more than a dozen contemporaries alleging that Farage used Nazi language, sang Nazi songs, and targeted minority pupils, including anti-Semitic abuse towards a classmate who later became a BAFTA and Emmy-winning director. Farage now rejects the allegations flatly, with his spokesman suggesting memory is unreliable after 45 years. Notice the parallel dynamics. In both stories, the core issue is not just what happened then, but how Farage handles the past now. When he was asked about similar claims years ago, he conceded that he had said ridiculous things. The shift in total denial today is what unnerves observers. A mature politician says, "I was young, I was nasty, I was ashamed, I learned." A politician in trouble says, "Prove it. It was ages ago. You cannot trust your own memories." Those are different moral postures, and voters can feel the difference. So, the Epstein link matters because it amplifies the same theme. Farage's instinct, when confronted with a reputational threat rooted in the past, is not contrition, but minimization plus counterattack. With Epstein, he tries to surf the outrage while keeping his distance from Trump's particular mess. With Dulwich, he tries to treat a chorus of witnesses as a political plot. Both approaches feed the suspicion that he is a man who never really left the old culture behind. There's also a strategic point about Reform UK. The party is rising in polls, but it is brittle in reputation. Its brand rests on being the truth party against a corrupt system. Any hint that its leader is surrounded by dark money operators and tainted fixers corrodes that brand from within. The Nathan Gill bribery case that we've been tracking already chipped at the party's claim to moral cleanliness. Add a whiff of Epstein by proxy, and the Reform story starts to look less like righteous revolt and more like a travelling circus of a compromised man. The public is not allergic to rebellion, it is allergic to hypocrisy. What happens next depends on two things. First, the actual content of the Epstein releases. If the files mainly restate old information, Farage will probably ride it out with a shrug and a few radio quips. If they deepen the Trump story in a way that keeps the scandal burning, Farage will be forced either to distance himself from Trump more openly or to go down with him in a shared narrative. Second, the handling of the Dulwich allegations. If Farage offers a fuller, more human account, he could diffuse some anger. If he keeps stonewalling, he invites a drip of further testimony, and every drip is now framed against the larger question of what kind of people and what kind of ethics he has sheltered for decades. My own judgment is that the Epstein connection with structurally indirect links is politically lethal precisely because it is so easy to explain to ordinary voters. You do not need a conspiracy chart. You just say, Farage's circle built Bannon's European machine. Epstein was Bannon's backstage advisor, and Farage was happy to be the front man until it all fell apart. That sounds like the kind of company you keep if you think rules exist for other people and not for you. And the deeper irony is this: Farage's talent has always been to read the public mood. Tell a simple story about decency versus corruption. The danger is now the simple story is being told about him.